I think you should take the burden off from the customer to decide. If I'm in a supermarket and I have to spend 5 minutes to figure out whether product A or B is better, it's a problem because I'm gonna not waste 5 minutes on every product I wanna buy.
Welcome back to this series of podcasts on climate change. We've met with Professor Reto Knutti, one of the most renowned climate scientists in the world. And today we're going to be talking about misinformation and fake news. You may think that this is something that a certain president made up and invented recently, the whole fake news debate, the misinformation thing. But quite the opposite. There have been climate deniers around for a long, long time, even though since the 60s it's been known that carbon is having a negative impact on our planet. Already last century, there are proven evidence-based examples of where, for instance, the oil lobbies have got together and set a goal to create misinformation that will confuse us on the subject of climate change. So please do sit back, get your popcorn out and enjoy this podcast. I certainly loved speaking to Reto Knutti, thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Hope you do too. Let's talk a little bit now about the role of society. And one thing that I really liked in the Lost in Data bulletin paper that you wrote was, that thing about we need to work with each other. And certainly with all the kind of projects that we've run in the past, and it's always difficult at this point, if I tell the truth about how much our clients, the performance of the team improved through collaboration. People think I'm just making it up. I've tested this at parties with friends, and I've tested it in sales conversations. Until you've actually seen the power of collaboration, you just don't believe it. And it's interesting when you were talking about, we need to break down barriers, we need to get people to come together. And I think there was the Marshall Report in the late 90s, if I remember rightly, already spoke about this, that we need to bring industry, politics, science to work together. At the same time, there was a leaked paper, I think around the same time, from the fossil fuel industries, where the goal was, and I think you mentioned this in your paper as well, the goal was to basically confuse society and make them doubt that climate change is real. Is that right? Or?
Absolutely, that's right. It's very well documented. Honestly, the problem has been known scientifically, but there were very strong circles that of course had no interest in changing, and that's largely the fossil fuel industry, but also parts of other industry, and the wealthy people are sort of taking the position, why should I change? Why should I give up on something, even though it may not necessarily mean giving up something, but that's the perception we're in, right? The perception we're in right now, the current framing is climate change mitigation is expensive. It means I cannot do the things I would like to do, so it's restricting my individual choices and freedom, and it means government intervention, and larger parts of the population, they hate government intervention and taxes, right? So that has brought us into a left-right separation that is almost religious, like either you're for climate change mitigation and you want to save the world, or you're completely opposed, and the US is most pronounced at that, and there's almost nothing in between.
Yeah.
And when you get to this divide, it's almost impossible to make any progress, right? And you get all of these denial, not quite denial, but you get these arguments that everybody kind of agrees that these things should be solved on both parts of the spectrum, but then you get to this, it's not solutions, yes, but not here, not now, not me, not like this, and please for free, right? Yeah. This is not in my backyard, so we kind of agree that something should be done, but when it comes to individual choices or regulation, people say no, right? Yeah. We need to understand more. We need more electricity, and the Chinese should go first. And you find all sorts of excuses to take the action away from you doing actually something, right? And psychologically, this is well understood, right? It's called cognitive dissonance, right? You have a certain worldview and a convenient life, and someone comes to you and say, hey, you are wrong. You need to change, right? What's the response? No, I'm not wrong, right? It doesn't exist. I'm not responsible. It's not so bad. It's too costly. The solutions won't work. My neighbor is worse. You find all sorts of arguments for getting rid of that cognitive dissonance to excuse your own behavior. And obviously you cannot make progress if you are in that divide. So that's why I argued we need to overcome that divide and talk about solutions that people actually find attractive.
And this is so wonderful to hear this from you, somebody who really works deep in this area with it every day. And this is exactly what we're saying as well, coming from a very different angle, not from the climate science, but just from basically the whole sociological side of it, of how do we get people to change and getting them together, getting them to realize that they're all part of the solution and not that the others are part of the problem. If I think about when I started consulting back in 2009, and I'd been running a company for 8 years, decided I'm going to go off on my own and be a consultant. And the first project, it was a war zone. It really was. There were all these different departments and suppliers and everyone was arguing with each other. And I'll never forget, one of the breaking points in that project was when I wrote on a flip chart, I said the word I and you is replaced by we. And if anyone blames anyone else in this room, they're not allowed to speak for the next 10 minutes. And everyone kind of rolled their eyes when I did it. But then we started practicing. And when you say you have a problem and you need to change, it's a very different thing to we have a problem and we need to change. It makes such a big difference. But getting people together, the question is now, if we talk about firstly bringing the consumers and industry together, and we can talk about politicians and scientists later, but with consumers and industry, who needs to change? Is it a chicken and egg thing? Do they both need to change? Is it about me eating less meat, or is it about my supermarket selling less meat?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously both, right? It's if the consumer asks for something and wants to buy something, then the producer will produce more options. If no one is buying something, then it's going to be very hard for the supermarket to produce a lot of options because it's just economically not viable. And we're seeing at the moment that the market for sustainable solutions is not great, right? The number of people who buy ecologically friendly products is not great, right? Yeah. People to spend less money on cheaper things right now. So the customer has some leverage, but the customer can only do so much, right? Because if there are no other options, then the customer cannot change. So the producer has to come up with alternatives. And once the alternatives are cheaper and better, the customer will actually buy them. Right? And if you look back at the historical environmental problems, and that started with waste, and then the air pollution and water pollution and the ozone hole and asbestos and pesticides, and all the way to the pandemic, none of these were ever solved by individual responsibilities of the consumer suddenly making smart decisions, right? Because the consumer doesn't want to think too much when he buys things. He wants to just buy things because they're nice and convenient, right? Yeah. So I think it's, as much as the consumer can make a difference in the choices and can make more choices today than he could a year ago, it's partly regulation and big companies that have to offer alternatives that are attractive and better, right? And then the customer, even if the customer is dumb and lazy, they will buy it because it's easy.
And I think the whole thing as well, we talk a lot about it needs to be cheaper or climate science costs money and things like that. But if I just always give this same example, it'll make me look very old here, but my very first 2 wages, after I'd paid for the rent on the house I was living in with some other guys, but after I paid for all the things I had to pay for, the first 2 wages, what was left over, the disposable income, it went on a stereo. It was a beautiful stereo, and it was at £600-700 at the time, which was outside of my price range, but hey, this was great, And I still got that stereo, and my daughter even uses it along with her record player. But if we think now about the amount of money that we spend on mobile phones all the time, it's the proof that it doesn't have to be cheaper, But I've also just mentioned LPs, I've mentioned records, they've had a resurgence, and I'm really hoping the environment's going to have a resurgence soon. But if I think about it, is an LP actually better for the environment than streaming music on one of the streaming things? And this is the bit where I think it gets really hard for consumers, and it gets really easy for those radicals, regardless if it's right or left, to say, well, if you drive an electric vehicle, you're actually having a worse impact on the planet. than if you drive a diesel car. And I've got a 20, 30-year-old diesel car, and before we manufacture a new car, it's better I carry on driving. How do we deal with these kind of arguments? What's the answer?
The answer is not easy, because often sustainability doesn't have one single index. I mean, we can try to collapse it into one index, but you're going to miss out a lot of relevant context. So there's going to be resource questions, like where does the material come from? Then there's going to be people involved in digging up the things out of the ground. There's going to be energy use. There's going to be the landfills if you throw things away. And it's not easy, right? If you buy something that is expensive and then you never use it, it doesn't really make sense, right? If you very rarely use it. I mean, I once read an article about the cordless drills. I think the average time a cordless drill is used is like something like 5 minutes.
Yeah,
it's very, very, very low. You have one at home, but you very rarely use it. So it may not need to be built for 1,000 years, because it doesn't need to, right?
Yeah. Or you could maybe share it with other people.
Or you can share it. Yeah. But then for other things that you need use often, then maybe reliability and repairability is a big issue. So it's not quite so easy. But I think you should take the burden off from the customer to decide. If I'm in a supermarket and I have to spend 5 minutes to figure out whether product A or B is better, and I don't figure out what the Nutri-Score or the Eco-Score or whatever is, it's a problem, because I'm gonna not waste 5 minutes on every product I want to buy. So there should be certain standards that just need to be fulfilled, and then the choices are obvious, right? We've done it with the light bulbs. At some point we just banned the old ones, and now you buy LEDs, right? There's no other option.
And this is where we get to the point of regulation politics, the government. So in episode 5 today, we talked about the shared responsibility of climate change. We talked about the negative impacts of fake news and misinformation. In episode 6, we're going to double down on the responsibility of governments. We're going to talk about what kind of governmental system, dictatorship, democracy, what kind of government will help us in the future. We're going to talk about who needs to pay to clean the planet up. Should all countries pay the same because we're all suffering the same under climate change? Or is it down to certain countries paying more whilst other countries pay less to fix this problem? Once again, it's a really interesting conversation, because we shouldn't forget, even though Reto Knutti is a climate scientist, he's been involved with the whole subject, the whole arena of climate change his entire life. He's been involved on UN councils that have been talking about this with multidisciplinary groups. So it's very, very good to get his balanced view about what needs to happen and what governments need to do, which role they need to play in the fight against climate change, and what we can all expect from our governments in the future. So do make sure that you're registered on our YouTube channel, The Earth Circle, to make sure that next interview is in your feed. Or otherwise, go over to patreon.com, register on The Earth Circle there, and you'll be able to see all these interviews straight away. They're waiting for you today.